There's thousands of years of scientific research explaining things like consciousness, love, unity, and God. Today, my conversation with Dr. Amit Goswami, theoretical physicist and author, dives into his decades of research and work, elucidating how the ancients already knew how to connect to their higher selves, God, their soul, and use this connection to answer questions that even today challenges modern materialistic science. Tune into this conversation and gain some insight into how Dr. Goswami is answering questions with his theories of quantum physics that modern day science either can't or won't. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Amit Goswami, and I am so excited about today's conversation because, as I was just saying before we hit record, your book that you wrote years ago, The Self-Aware Universe, it was one of the first books that I read that really spoke to my scientific brain, as well as the questions that I had around topics that would be considered more spiritual in their nature. And so today I'm really happy to engage in this conversation with you and to talk about these things. And the first thing I'd like to get your perspective on is, as somebody who for many years has been involved with, professionally theoretical physics, but also merging things like consciousness and love and the quantum self with what is now considered the more scientific realm. Have you seen a shift in people, and that's just the general public, as well as maybe even people in science, as far as their openness to these topics?
It is still very controversial. There is some openness. There is at least one book out which actually several books out which supports the theory, and quite a few papers. But still, I would say that most of the scientific establishment don't like mixing science and spirituality. Basically, their problem is with spirituality. They do not like that spirituality should have anything to do with science. And this basic prejudice creates a problem for the acceptance of the new paradigm that I'm proposing, and this is the only right way that we can introduce consciousness into science. Otherwise, there is no science of consciousness. So we are in a peculiar situation. If you stay with the prejudice that science and spirituality should not mix, then you can never solve the problem of consciousness. So, it's a choice that scientists are not very willing to change their minds. But psychologists are already very willing to be open to quantum physics. So psychology is much more popular base for quantum and the integration of science and spirituality than mainstream hard sciences. That's as best I can describe the situation.
And how do you describe consciousness? I've heard you talk about it in other interviews, but when you say consciousness, what does that mean to you?
Well, the most important thing about consciousness to confront is that consciousness is not an object. This is the stuff that scientists have to convince themselves. Consciousness, what we call a conscious experience, has two poles. A subject experiencing an object, an experiencer, and something that is experienced. This twofold aspect is duality. If we deny it, then we deny the other domain of reality from which this twofold reality comes, which is the unity. So there is oneness of everything, and that is what we call consciousness, but that is unconscious to us. As we become consciously aware, the oneness splits into a subject and an object. The subject experiences the object. This is how consciousness has to be understood. Spiritual traditions, wisdom traditions, they all understood consciousness in this way. Esoteric aspects of Christianity also has the same view. So spiritual traditions, wisdom traditions are completely okay with this depiction. And quantum physics is also supporting it completely. There is just no ambiguity in this interpretation of quantum physics. All paradoxes are solved. And therefore, if we lived in normal times, without science, without dogma, then I think this would be a very joyful thing for scientists, because we have a solution for the very difficult problem of how to get a subject into a science that is always based on objects. Since Newton gave us a science of objects, and we have been doing science as study of objects ever since. But consciousness is not an object. This is where the problem arises for the regular scientists. They make consciousness into an object. They think of consciousness as an object, something that can be computed, something that come out of a computer.
Right. And so this idea that consciousness is linked to our brain and our ability to think and reason and use logic within the realm of space and time is, it's very different from what you're speaking of, where consciousness exists outside of space time, and it allows us to be a part of this field of oneness or unity or connectedness to one another and to the universe. Is that a fair maybe comparison between the two, what conventional science says?
Not quite fair, because the model that I'm proposing includes the other model. This consciousness can also think, also do all the things that you said, make decisions. All these things are included in this description. This description is inclusive. It includes everything that the materialist can say about consciousness. Plus, it adds the fact that consciousness is the ground of being, and we have subject and object, an experiencer in addition to the object that we experience. In other words, we are saying that when we think of an object, but we are not the object. Consciousness is not the object. Consciousness is the experiencer experiencing the object. And both are happening in unconscious, which is the ground of being, which is a oneness.
And so somebody who has been maybe educated and trained and developed dogmatic thinking in the world of materialism, where consciousness is linked to a person and their ability to think, and doesn't have this more expanded view that you're talking about, how would somebody open themselves up to that?
Well, what it requires is meditation. If we meditate and slow down, then we very clearly see that how we are not what we are thinking. That Cartesian way of looking at, that I think, therefore I am, is where the basic problem is. That is the wrong way of thinking. Consciousness is not a thought. I is not a thought. I is the thinker. And thinker is not a thought. Thinker is the experiencer of the thought.
So meditation is a way, and I know you've written about this in many different ways over time, but meditation and deep meditation is a way that we can start to access that ability to connect to oneness and connect to, this expanded feeling and sense of consciousness. Is that correct?
Yeah. What happens with meditation? If we meditate, consciousness expands. And when it expands, it enables us to think more of consciousness as me, an object, than consciousness that includes both I and you. So this is why meditation is very important, that expansion of consciousness. If when you think of consciousness as an object, then we can include only me, I that I can look at. And that me is very much like an object. And this is what confuses the scientist. But if the scientist meditates, all of a sudden the scientist will find that consciousness has expanded and it has room for other people. It wants to take care of not only oneself, but also other people, like one's family, one's friends, and it goes more and more and more, whole world maybe, those inspired moments that we call inspiration or enthusiasm. That's another word. We feel enthusiastic because we are including something about theos, which we ancient traditions used to call God. And still, I guess God is still popular, but God is not as popular today as God was in previous times.
No, absolutely. What are your thoughts on God? I know you've written a book about this, but how would you describe God and your connection to God and what God is for all of us, whether we're open to acknowledging that or not?
Actually, there's no need to be confused about God, because the traditions also puts attributes to God. If you think about those attributes, you get what we are saying in quantum physics. Quantum physics, God is consciousness as the ground of being. God is everything. God is one without a second. Now, how does that fit in with the popular picture? It doesn't. Popular picture is more of a God as a king, super duper human being sitting on a throne in the sky. Now, that picture is too naive to even talk about it. But scientists attack that picture rather than scientists face the reality that we already have much more sophisticated picture of God in the form of what spiritual wisdom traditions are saying and now what quantum physics is saying. Quantum physics is not saying that God is a super duper human being sitting in his throne in the sky. It's not saying that. It's saying that God is everything. And this is why what spiritual traditions are saying. Look at what Jesus is saying. Kingdom of God is everywhere, but people don't see it. He's saying that kingdom of God is everywhere. He's not saying that kingdom of God is only in the sky. He's saying everywhere. Sky, earth, everything is included in God. God is just that oneness. So in that way, you have to change the way you think about these things. If you think about this way, then you look at say things that religions do say. That God, for example, is omnipresent. What does omnipresent means? Same thing as I just said, kingdom of God is everywhere. That's the omnipresent everywhere. And this concept fits in with the concept of quantum non-locality. Non-locality is the idea that two objects, when they're correlated, they can communicate instantly at any distance outside of space and time. So non-locality suggests that there is indeed two domains of reality. One is space and time, and one is outside of space and time. And this is what the spiritual tradition is saying. Where is God? God is here, God is not here. This is the way they describe it. It is here, it is not here. It is near, it is very far. This is the way God is described in traditions, spiritual traditions. And notice always that includes both heaven and earth. God is transcendent. The word transcendent includes what is immanent. Transcendent becomes immanent. Transcendent and immanent are not two separate dualities, but transcendent becomes immanent. Quantum physics, what we have is consciousness and its possibilities. Consciousness chooses, possibilities become actuality. In this way. So one has to change one's thinking, and it takes a little bit of openness and a little bit of sophistication.
And you mentioned locality versus non-locality. And just for anyone who maybe doesn't exactly know what that means, the local world or the physical world, as most people recognize it, this requires signals for messages to be sent and received, versus non-locality where there is no signaling and there's this instantaneous or real-time non-signal based connection between particles where things can happen without the passing of time, without the limitations or beyond the limitations of space. And is there maybe another way that you can expand on that or describe that for anyone who maybe finds those ideas confusing?
Yeah, probably if you bring in theory of relativity, it might help a little. In relativity theory, there is a maximum speed limit in space and time, speed of light. So everything has to move in a finite speed. All signals have to move with a finite speed. Instant communication is not possible. Whereas quantum physics is saying that instant communication happens between any two objects which has locally come together and interacted. They have become correlated or entangled. This entanglement allows them to communicate at any distance, galactic apart, and instantly. So it must be without signal. Space-time communication has to have signals. But this is signal-less communication. How is it possible? Therefore, there must be a domain of reality outside of space and time. It is this domain of reality that we are calling consciousness as the ground of being. Consciousness and its possibility. The waves of possibility is the nature of the objects when they are outside of space and time. They live in this domain of potentiality. Consciousness is the domain of potentiality. And it's a domain of potential oneness, because objects which communicate instantly must be one. I can only communicate with myself. I cannot communicate with anybody else. If I'm communicating with somebody else, that means that somebody and me are one. So this is what the whole import of the theory. Oneness of everything, that's reality. And that reality, for it to become a two-ness, subject and object, requires a mechanism. I discovered that mechanism, and it's called Tangled hierarchy. Well, based on an idea of somebody else, Dan Hofstadter, but I applied it to quantum physics, and it works. There's a tangled hierarchical mechanism in the brain, in the form of perception and memory. Perception requires memory, memory requires perception. The hierarchy is not simple. One level affecting the other, but the other level cannot affect back. Tangled hierarchies, both levels affect each other in a circular way. Memory creates perception, perception creates memory. Tangled hierarchy. And this tangled hierarchy is what embodies consciousness into the brain. So the whole theory is a very neat package. Everything is explained, all about experiences, the brain's role, the body's role. It has become very sophisticated. I have, since Sense of Self-Aware Universe, I have written some 22 or 23 books, some with the help of other people. And it's now very sophisticated science. Feelings are explained, thinking, intuition, self, we already talked about. All these things are explained. Health, psychology, even economics can be understood better under this science. So, as I said, I'm convinced that this is the way science will, in the future, move. There is no alternative, because there is no other way that we can introduce consciousness into science, subject the idea of experiencer into science.
And so, as an example, within what you've come to realize through the Tangled hierarchy, what would be an example, say, of how our physical bodies are responsible or at play for us understanding greater consciousness? So how could somebody use their body and their groundedness in the physical body to have this greater connection?
Okay, so let's go back to the first idea that you had, which is that an example of tangled hierarchy? Yeah, a very good example of tangled hierarchy is the liar's sentence. I am a liar. Think of the sentence, if I am a liar, then I'm telling the truth. The sentence contradicts itself. Then we go back to the beginning, if I'm telling the truth, and then we realize, then I am a liar. So the sentence fluctuates between I am a liar, then I'm telling the truth. If I'm telling the truth, then I am a liar. Then I'm telling the truth, then I am a liar. Then I'm telling the truth, then I am a liar. It goes on and on in a circular way. This is an ideal example of tangled hierarchy. What happens is that this sentence have isolated itself from the rest of the world. And same thing happens in the brain. Because brain has a tangled hierarchy like this, when consciousness identifies with it, then consciousness isolates itself from the rest of the world, thinks itself separate from the rest of the world. This is what the subject-object split is. The subject, which is embodied consciousness in the brain, but it's an appearance. It's really not separate. Brain is very much in the world. But because consciousness has identified with and got trapped into this tangled hierarchy, it thinks that it is isolated from the world. It's an appearance. It's sort of illusory appearance. So the separateness that we feel is actually an illusory component in it. We're not really separate. And this is what meditation does. Meditation opens us up. I already said expansion of consciousness. Eventually, consciousness expands to include everything. And I see that oneness, everything is one. I actually had that experience once, that everything is one. And many people describe such experience. In Sanskrit, it's called Sabhikalpa Samadhi. So it's very much describable, very much understandable, this way of looking, and most importantly, it can be experienced. Anybody, Abraham Maslow called it a peak experience. And he also agreed completely with me that many people have these experiences. It's not such an isolated experience. We all feel expanded when we are looking at a beautiful sunset. We all feel expanded when we are looking at a beautiful flower. So expansion is not that uncommon an experience unless you are totally in your intellect. And this totally being intellect is a habit that scientists have more than other people. Artists, psychologists even, they don't have this problem. People can relate to expansion of consciousness very directly. How it is connected with body, that's where ideas of love comes in. Love we don't feel in the brain. Love we feel in the heart. But again, scientists will object to that. Scientists will say, no, love is just sex. It is completely understandable in terms of brain and the reproductive organs. We don't need to put heart into the equation. We insist that no, heart is essential because heart is where you feel, where you don't think, but feel love. Love has two components, thinking love and feeling love. And what we call real love is feeling love, not the thinking love. Real love has both components. Feeling love is the major component, and thinking love, of course, is also a component. So in this way, we connect to the body. Body has things called chakras where we feel. Its feeling is connected with the organs of the body, not just the brain.
So this idea that there's this, almost like a circular loop that traps consciousness within the physical body and within our individual self, let's say, it's something that we can all escape or open ourselves up out of through meditation, because you almost open up that loop where you can allow consciousness to, rather than sort of creating this circular dynamic where you have your memories and then your perceptions, and then your perceptions create your experience, which creates your memories. You become more of a vessel for consciousness to flow through and direct itself throughout you, the body, the perceiver, but also back into itself. Is that sort of what you're describing?
Yeah. I'm saying that this tangled hierarchy that you beautifully paraphrased not only exists in the brain, but also in the heart. Because scientists have found that the heart has a little brain.
Yeah.
Heart has a little brain in it, which has the same memory perception duo that forms the tangled hierarchy. Therefore, it can also trap consciousness. And similar duo exists also in the little brain, also exists in the navel, near the digestive organs. Navel chakra, we call it. These points are called chakras. And navel, the elimination organs, that's the root chakra. Sexual organs, that's the sex chakra. Then navel chakra, then heart chakra, then throat chakra, and then the brain. This is the brain chakra, the cortex basically, and then the crown chakra at the top of the brain. The 7 chakras that traditionally described are the points on the body parallel to the pretty much in the centrally located axis, like the spine, parallel to it. These 7 centers are called centers of feeling or chakras. So we have a complete description of how the brain participates in consciousness, as well as how the human body participates in consciousness. Body's participation is very important because we feel this, heart especially. We feel quantities that we very much appreciate and respect, like love in the heart.
And I've also heard you talk about cognition as the ability to feel versus what most people would consider cognition to be, which is thinking and logic and reason. And I thought that that was so interesting because it's very unique from any way that I've heard cognition described before. Could you expand on that a little bit and just talk to what you meant by cognition is really your ability to feel?
Cognition is giving meaning to something. Now, how can I give meaning? Giving meaning with thinking, of course. We think and we give meaning. That is pretty obvious. So thinking produces cognition is pretty obvious. Feeling produces conscious cognition is not that obvious, but you think about it, what do we actually feel? We feel that something is pleasant or we feel something is not pleasant, unpleasant. This is how we feel. We like or we dislike. But this is also cognition, right? Because I can differentiate an object. So feeling the cognition is a very limited cognition. With thinking, we can cognize all kinds of ways. But in feeling only like and dislike. But this is also a kind of cognition. And the proof of that is that animals, the mammals, all have cognizing ability. Just look at your cat or your dog, and you will say, oh, they are cognizing. They are very clear about what they like and what they dislike. You pet them, they like that. On the other hand, you try to treat them in other ways, and they will immediately start hissing. They don't like it. So this ability of cognition, animals very much have. Not all animals, but mammalians especially have it. And mammalians, we know, have midbrain, and that is how they have it. Cortex is not the only place where we can cognize. We can also cognize with the midbrain.
And just to go back to something you were talking about a little bit earlier, you in your work in general, and even just when you're speaking, you reference the ancient researchers often. And I think that's so interesting because, there's so much of science now that really dismisses anything that could be considered ancient and certainly doesn't honor it as having wisdom. But we'll look at what we have now and say we've advanced or we've evolved so much. And I think it's so interesting and really is honoring of the knowledge and the sense that existed before us, that you look to ancient traditions and ancient ideas and are pulling them forward into today's world and today's science. So what are some things that you feel are really valuable from the ancient world and the knowledge and the knowings that ancient traditions had that we have either forgotten or we maybe need to open ourselves up to again in today's day and age?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that ancient people talked about that we have forgotten is that we can be connected. We are very much connectable. We come from oneness and we can be one. What happens to us is that we have fallen prey to the thinking brain in a major way. In rational thinking, we don't need consciousness. We can solve problems with rational thinking. We don't need intuition. We don't need creativity. So these ancient people are very much aware that creativity is basic and intuition is basic. Without intuition, we cannot fathom the world. But intuitions come directly from consciousness. So admitting intuition is to go beyond today's materialistic science. Materialistic science says there is only matter moving in space and time. There is no other domain of reality. This concept, this single concept, is blinding the scientists from seeing the ancient wisdom, that we can be connected not through local signals only, but also instantly through non-locality, through this other domain of reality, outside of space and time. This single concept, non-locality, if scientists were open to it, they are opening up a little bit. 2 years ago, 2023, Alan Aspect and others were given Nobel Prize for this concept of non-locality. They demonstrated non-locality experimentally. So they are given a Nobel Prize. So that's a good sign. But they have to, many scientists are thinking that, well, non-locality, yes, but that's only for the subatomic domain. That's not true for the human domain. This is a limiting concept. No, it's very much true for human domain. Telepathy has been proven experimentally to exist. We even have brain potential transferred from one brain to another without signals. We even have that proof experimentally. Jacobo Greenberg, a Mexican neurophysiologist with whom I actually worked with, I participated in the experiment that they did, demonstrating that electrical signal can be transferred from one brain to another if the two brains are correlated by meditating the whole time. So after this kind of proofs are given, to ignore it is really a tremendous sad thing that today's scientists are participating in.
And what is your view on, you came from the scientific world and you've merged these other ideas and a much greater understanding of existence in with what we consider science now. But why do you think science is so limited? Like, why is there so much materialism and such an aversion to considering consciousness and this expanded sense of awareness and love and God, all of these ideas, they're so fervently eliminated and cut out of conventional science, and it's taking so much work to bring these things back to our awareness when it seems like ancient people, ancient researchers just innately had a sense that you needed to recognize and acknowledge and live with all of these things to understand the world.
We have become very used to very fast changes. This information technology has made us think that everything can be done very fast. No, not everything can be done very fast. Remember when Copernicus suggested that Earth is not the center of the universe, but the sun is where Earth moves around the sun. Things don't move around the Earth. Earth, in fact, moves around the sun. And how long did it take for mainstream scientists to accept that? Whole 200 years. First Galileo, but even that was controversial. And then ultimately, finally, in the 17th century, when Newton proved these laws of motion and law of gravity, discovered the law of gravity, then finally people accepted that, okay, things in outer space and things on Earth move under the same laws, and therefore we must transfer into Copernican solar system model rather than the Earth-centered model. So it took 200 years. You have to get to that. A habit is very difficult to change. It is simpler for scientists to do science the way they do it. Everything is matter is a very simple philosophy. And everything is information, serves the purpose of, presently there is a huge thing about AI, artificial intelligence. The generative AI is changing practically the job world very much. Everybody is talking about generative artificial intelligence. And if things were only information, no room for meaning, no room for God, no room for consciousness, then it would be so simple for scientists to dominate, especially the information scientists, the computer scientists to dominate the world of science. So this is a very tempting situation. It's all about power. Who has the power to dominate the rest of us? I remember when in the 1980s, scientific materialism became the paradigm for the whole academy. I remember it very distinctly. Before then, it was controversial. We debated, but we debated the existence of God quite freely. All of a sudden, the physics department started saying, no, you cannot say the word God in classroom. In fact, whenever I said the word God, I said the G word. I didn't say God. I didn't say God because it would violate the unspoken rule that you cannot utter the word God in the classroom. So, it is this kind of prejudice that has happened. And it can be understandable because power is something that everybody covet. See, if I can dominate all science by a very simple idea, and everybody thinks that way, I can present a unified front, which is also simpler, then it becomes very tempting to follow that. But psychology already has transpersonal psychology. So psychology is, hard scientists look at psychology in a very suspicious way. Psychology cannot prevent talking about love, talking about another domain, transpersonal domain, and that's a very good thing. So the science that I have developed is not very popular with hard scientists, but psychologists are accepting it. Transpersonal psychology especially, they all accept it. And that's a huge community. So it's not that we are not getting some footwork. We are getting some footing and places in some parts of the sciences. But science has become so disparate, so separate. Physics, chemistry, biology, psychology, social sciences, these are all talked about in separate compartments. That compartmentalization does not help. So this science is so helpful to personal psychologists, but that does not change the heart of a physicist or a chemist or a biologist. I have written a book on biology. I have written books on chemistry and physics, of course, is the hard sciences. Their consciousness science has not much to say. But in biology, consciousness science has very much things to say. Psychology, it's totally science of consciousness. And then social sciences, sociology, etc. That also has anthropology. These have great bearing if you take this science within consciousness model rather than the materialist model. It fits, the data fits our model much better than without our model. So this is the position. The position is that science is not just physics and chemistry. Science has living objects in it. In conventional science, one cannot answer questions like what is the difference between living and non-living. Science within consciousness does. This kind of basic questions, what is consciousness that you asked me, that began the interview. Scientists cannot answer that. Scientists will answer it as, oh, consciousness is something that we have a quality of, subjective quality. This is what we call consciousness. They try to pretend that consciousness, as if consciousness is just an object. Its subjectivity is an object, subjective quality, a subjective quality of something. That's what makes consciousness. Seemingly making you think that it is just an object that is right very close to us for discovering it because it's just an object, and science of objects we already have. But subjective quality is not it. That there is really an experiencer experiencing an object, a duality that has to be explained. And this duality comes from, and oneness is the explanation. So on one hand, you have full explanations of things that are real as well, like psychological things, distinction of life and non-life, a proper theory of evolution. And on the other hand, you have all these prejudice theories, which do give answers, because the world is, part of the world is conditioned. The conditioned part has become mechanical. So the conditioned science, materialist science, works for that part of the world. But the part of the world where it doesn't is also very notable, because that's the world of the artist. That's the world of the social scientist, where I have to serve other people, I have to heal people. I have to love people. I have to take care of people. And then there, the physical science, this materialist way of looking at things is completely hopeless. What is love? There is no love in materialist science. There is no taking care of another person in materialist science. We are independent, separate objects. How can we think of the other? The other cannot even be defined. So you have to go and ask the basic questions before you start saying that, yeah, many basic questions are not answerable in materialist science. Then only you get to the alternative paradigm that we are proposing. Okay? It's going to happen, but it will take time because, as I said, beliefs are very hard to give up. Habit becomes a habit. Scientists habitually now think of the world as information, as matter only.
And you mentioned AI just now when you were speaking. Do you see a splitting in the scientific community between the world of materialism and mechanistic thinking that can very easily explain their world through matter only, and this more expanded view of existence and of our place within existence? Because the materialist world as you just said, once you start really considering some of the basic questions of existence, it seems almost like there are no answers there. There are just some questions that they are unwilling to ask and answer.
Well, it's not so much as unwilling to find answers, it's that incapacitated to find answers. They have no capacity of finding these answers, and therefore they deny that the phenomena exist. There are two ways of dealing with the phenomenon. You appreciate the phenomenon, you admit that the phenomenon exists, and then you say that, well, okay, it's important to explain the phenomenon. Or you can take the attitude that any phenomenon that does not exist with the materialist view, does not agree with the materialist view, cannot be explained by the materialist view, does not exist. So scientists have taken this latter view because it's an easier one for them to handle. Look, there is a power structure here, just like religions. Can you imagine that Christians all of a sudden all would agree that, yeah, the esoteric Christianity is correct, and that esoteric Christianity agrees with Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, and Judaism and everything, and therefore we should only accept esoteric Christianity and give up evangelicalism? Can you imagine an evangelical Christian giving up their point of view? It has become similar. Science accepting a dogma has become a religion-like thing, religion-like rigid structure. They just will not consider any phenomenon that does not agree with them. They will just reject the phenomena itself. The phenomena does not exist. Love does not exist. Goodness does not exist. Archetypes, any archetype, truth. Look at what has happened to truth. Truth does not exist. It's a very difficult concept for scientists to accept, but yet scientists are accepting it. And by accepting it, science is opening itself to a huge amount of corruption. Corruption was unheard of in science. Scientists were one bunch where everything would be done honestly. People would go years and years in order to keep on to that. I must describe reality as it is. I cannot fake it. But today, many papers are being published which are fake papers. Today, we have changed completely. We are using generative AI to generate essays, which has nothing to do with the human being. Computer programs are speaking with computer programs. This is what is happening in the world of science even. So you can see that the belief systems are influencing people in ways for which there is just no way out, because this is a closed system. Everything is matter has become a closed system. Anything that is outside of the purview of the everything is matter philosophy does not exist. This is the position they are taking. And this position is very difficult to respond to, just like religion, just like evangelicals.
And I know that you offer a PhD program for people to study and learn these types of things over an extended period of time. How do you what does that program look like, as far as how do you open people up to, who are obviously already open to a degree, that's why they're coming to the program, but how do you really instill these ideas of an expanded way of thinking and a sense of connectedness or oneness or unity within people, so that they can also apply that to science and the world around them?
Yeah, very wonderful question. The basic idea is that we tell our students that you must experience. So meditation is taught from the beginning. Creativity is taught from the beginning. So we say that the world cannot be understood without opening up. Opening up is the primary objective. That we become prejudiced for various reasons, we become conditioned. The way the world is made, without conditioning, we could not forget the oneness. And if we constantly remember the oneness, that would hamper our relationship with each other, who are separate as a matter of practicality. Because if we are one, then we're missing the component of the world being separate from us. So this oneness and separateness simultaneously existing, and the oneness becoming a little more subtle than the separateness, is our problem. So we are separate, we got to acknowledge that separateness completely, because otherwise who are we? Rabbi Hillel put it beautifully. If I'm not for myself, who am I? And then he said, if I'm only for myself, what am I? You feel the implication. This is the thing. We have to completely recognize that I am myself. I am separate indeed. Within that separateness, I have to discover the unity as well. And for this, we require from the beginning that we experience the unity reality. We meditate so that we feel expanded consciousness. We meditate more, we discover creativity, we discover intuition, messages that come not through sensory domain of reality, but with ESP, extrasensory perception. This is the basis of our teaching. And then, of course, we teach a lot of concepts, how consciousness-based psychology gives answers to psychological questions like relationship. We answer questions like how this consciousness-based approach explains economics or expands economics better so that some of the problems that you are having with economics can be solved. Same thing with business leadership. How business leadership had got stuck down and so much into monopoly and economy, capitalism is breaking down practically. How capitalism breakdown can be controlled by introducing the idea of consciousness, conscious economics. And of course, I talked about biology already. We explained the difference between living and non-living. We developed a much better theory of evolution that agrees with all experimental data, including the fossil gaps that Darwinism cannot explain. So we have a huge amount of success in terms of explaining things that materialists cannot explain. This is what I emphasized in the book, God is Not Dead. God is not dead because there is a whole bunch of experimental data. In the appendix, I showed 25 or 26. I named 26 questions that materialist science cannot answer. They're all big questions, like what is life? And these questions we can answer. So it's a huge prejudicial thing that we are trying to overcome, and that is what is taking time. Otherwise, this science would have been accepted years ago.
And you've mentioned meditation now many times throughout this conversation. Is there a particular type of meditation or a process that you suggest people engage in as far as their meditative practice that you've found is very effective?
Actually, what we do is to show that all meditations have their own usefulness. There are two main types of meditation. One is called concentration. You concentrate on a mantra. This is for focusing. And there's another type of meditation which is where you are just becoming aware and you're watching yourself thinking. That watching is emphasized. Or just sitting, doing nothing. That is emphasized. And we are saying that both are important for creativity. One is for creativity consists of both focusing and being relaxed. So two types of meditation. One is for focusing and one is for understanding and doing, actually relaxing, how to relax. So both type of meditations are important is our verdict, because creativity we find is a combination of do, working, focusing, and be, relaxing. Alternative focusing and relaxing, I sometimes jokingly call it do process. And this is what makes creativity very, very interesting and why meditation is so important for becoming creative. Both do and be.
Have you found in your own life and in your own work and your research that you have opened yourself up, or you find yourself accessing other levels of creativity and awareness through your meditative practice, that over time you can now look back and say, I think because of my meditation practice, I have come to these things that I otherwise would not have?
It's very difficult to differentiate. Life is one thing. You cannot always break it up in a conventional compartments. Yes, meditation has definitely played a role in my discoveries, and intuitive capacity has certainly improved over the years. I remember the concept of love, for example. When my second wife first challenged me that when you say love, you just think about love, you don't feel it. Learn to feel love in your heart. And that made a great impression on me. At that time, I did not believe that there is any consciousness in heart. So it was very intriguing to me. It took years to find out, but I still become very perseverant because it was important to me to get love from my wife, because she would completely deny that I love her because it's just all cerebral. So I learned to learn to love from my heart. It took years, literally. 10, 15 years it took before I could say that, yeah, I love from my heart. So meditation is very important. To have a partner in practice of things like love is very important. Relationship is very important. Relationship with the world is very important. Creativity is more than meditation. To recognize that is very important. Creativity applied to my own self, that I'll change the self. I'll not create just an external object like a book or a scientific idea, but I'll change who I am. And in the process, I found that there is something very much like a progression of how we live, progression of the level of happiness that we have, level of intelligence that we have. We have to go through the stages. And I've gone through some of the stages. I cannot say that I have gone through the whole thing, but certainly this idea of transformation in stages have proven to be very important to our new science.
Have you worked at or also intentionally developed a practice around connecting to your intuition?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I have actually, we meditate on improving our intention. It's called intention meditation. Improving our intuition. It's called intention meditation. I intend that I will intuit an archetype. Archetypes are the objects that we intuit, like love, beauty, justice, truth, wholeness, goodness, this kind of thing. So I intend to intuit an archetype. And then we say, okay, let my intention be consonant with the purposive movement of consciousness. Because it's ultimately consciousness which collapses the possibility into actuality, not my ego. So you open up for that. And then we become silent. And in that silence, meditation, intuition can come. And many people find that, yeah, their intuition ability improves with such a practice.
So directly, cultivating a connection or an acknowledgement with one's own intuition is a path towards a greater connectedness towards consciousness, and allowing this flow between consciousness, the self, and your intuitive connection, and then back out through consciousness.
Yeah, it's a connection. So every time we intuit, it's a connection to consciousness. And the more we feel connected, the happier we are. So it's it becomes a lifestyle. So my lifestyle that I have adapted, and the lifestyle that we preach to our students and to anybody who would listen, is that, look, if you live this way, integrating your thinking, your living, and how you make your livelihood, it all becomes congruent. And that congruence has tremendous effect on your level of happiness, because the conflicts go away more and more. You become a whole person, and that's what brings happiness in your life. So this is what I propose, that one does not have to be unhappy. One can always more or less be happy. Okay, there are, of course, physical ailments. There is even boredom, which sometimes do happen. So, but those moments can be minimized. The effect of those moments can be minimized. There are ways to deal with boredom. There are ways to deal with physical ailment. And if we accept those ways, then indeed suffering will diminish, if not entirely go away. In other words, we superimpose a lot of suffering that is unnecessary. So the lifestyle that quantum science is proposing is eliminate all unnecessary happiness, unnecessary suffering, and then we'll be happier and happier.
So as somebody who has gone from being unable to really feel from your heart to feel love through your heart to now teaching people how to sense and how to feel through all of their chakras, through their intuitive connection, through building a relationship to greater consciousness. What has been your path, or what do you think are some of the ways that you've allowed yourself to open up so that you could, make this journey? Because those are two extremes from one another.
Yeah, we have a path which is a path of basically find your wholeness. The goal is wholeness. This is our path. We call it quantum yoga. Sri Aurobindo, a great thinker in India, great philosopher, great spiritual master, he coined the phrase integral yoga. Yoga means integration, and there are many types of yoga laid out in the Bhagavad Gita, a great treatise you may have heard of. This karma yoga, bhakti yoga, jnana yoga, kriya yoga, raja yoga. There are many kinds of yogas. So Aurobindo said, no, we should do it together, integral yoga. But he was talking about philosophy. We are talking about quantum physics. We have seen that there is only one kind of yoga that will be based on quantum principles. Quantum principles are non-locality, we have mentioned that already, creativity, quantum leaps, discontinuity, and tangled hierarchy that we also have mentioned. These are the quantum principles. So these include these quantum principles to make one integral yoga, that is quantum yoga. This is our path to reach wholeness, no conflict.
And in studying this over time and doing the research and the writings that you have done in this space, what is maybe the greatest thing that you've come away with compared to how you were maybe living before as a physicist, and maybe in your past a materialist, versus the way you see the world and existence and our place within existence now?
Well, the integration of science and spirituality is if you think in terms of problem solving. We have solved many problems, many very difficult problems, but integration of science and spirituality is what I am most, if you want to use the word proud, most proud of. Because I think this is an inherent aspect of reality that really could change people. People have a scientific streak in them. They want to find verification. Ideas should be verified. On the other hand, there is spirituality, which is that we don't have to live in this contracted consciousness. We can find spirit and become expanded. One leads to happiness, the other one leads to satisfaction, because I'm finding answers that are right. I'm verified the truth. And both of these aspects are essential aspects of the human being. If we integrate them, then we live in a happy state, whereas we are not giving up the inquiring mind which wants to find the truth. So truth and happiness can coexist together. In finding truth, we don't have to become an intellectual. We can be open to intuition. We can be creative. And then we are combining both. So this is basis of quantum yoga. Don't give up the intellect, but incorporate the intellect within creativity. Intellect plus intuition, which will include the feelings as well. And that is the integrative way of living. Integral yoga or quantum yoga, whatever you want to call it.
And is this, in your opinion, and perhaps, through your research as well, when people now speak about manifesting or manifestation, there is somewhat of almost an ethereal sense around that. And what you're saying, this quantum yoga and really the integration of intellect with intuition amongst or within consciousness, it sounds like that is the path to what many people would call manifestation. Is that what you're saying? Is that how we manifest or how we experience the world is through this integration between our intellect and our personal intuitive connection?
Yeah, What I'm saying is that we become much more of producers, much more of manifestors, if we combine all the facilities that we have, if we become whole instead of separateness. The intellect by itself separates us from reality.
Mm-hmm.
Intuition by itself is not very effective because intuition has to give a form in terms of the intellect. Intellect helps us. So these are complementary aspects that we have: thinking and feeling, intuition and intellectualizing. These are complementary. They both are needed, and we cannot leave out anything. So that's the integral idea, quantum yoga. By the way, this phrase was invented by Valentin Hollister, my collaborator in recent books. So this is the basis of it, that we have both facilities. Why do we throw away one facility versus other? And that also creates a basic difference between male and female, because majority of female in the world still prefers that we look at the world with love, feelings, whereas men more prefer the intellectual way of looking at life and the world, which separates us. So we have this, on one hand, we have huge pressure, drive towards separateness, and we also have some pressure towards unity. The pressure towards unity, unfortunately, is losing out to the pressure towards separateness, because technology that the pressure towards separateness materialists have given rise to, this artificial intelligence technology especially, is so attractive on the face of it, and gives you that, today is just falling right into the way that people are more and more attracted towards power. This is not helping. Well, love, on the other hand, wants you to share your power. So the two philosophies are quite different. One is to get power individually, and this is why we are going towards more and more monopoly, more and more oligarchies that are controlling us. A few people becoming rich, and the rest of us just are poor and middle class. This is the way, if we continue the scientific materialist way, this is our lot. This is the way we're going to go. More and more wealth is going to be concentrated on only in few people. Power is going to be concentrated that same way, and rest of us are going to be more and more serf-like. That feudal way of living, that's going to come back. And the other way is more and more sharing with each other, living in wholeness. And this is what quantum science is proposing. Which one will win, we cannot really say, but I think that history tells us that we are bound to prevail eventually. Although at the moment it is very hard to see. At the moment, the movement is definitely towards more separateness. We'll see. We'll have to wait and see. We cannot predict the future.
Yeah, that's right. I do feel as though each of these, like every time we have a conversation like this, every time you put out a piece of writing, every book you publish, every student that enrolls in your program, these are all seeds that get planted and, energy that adds to the field of consciousness and the realization of unity and oneness. And so I don't know what that means for when things will change or if they'll change in our lifetime. But I do have a sense that now more than ever, people are, at least in the general public, people are more willing to hear conversations like this and are more willing to consider their own, like the deeper meaning behind their existence and their purpose here. And I think that that's a transition like that I can see amongst my peers and in my community, that even 5-10 years ago wasn't something that these things weren't talked about as openly or as readily. And I don't think people were considering them in the same way.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think things are changing. People are opening up. On the other hand, it is also true that the people are getting more separate. There are two drives going on. We cannot deny that the other drive, the separateness drive, is any less important than the drive towards unity. But drives towards unity, this post-materialist way of thinking, that used to be very diverse. There are many ways, like holism. There was many philosophies that were proposed with seriousness, and people wasted a lot of time over these false philosophies. I think these false philosophies are decreasing somewhat, and people are more uniting towards something that really works, like quantum physics. This is a positive, very positive progress, I think. So I think you are right. Basically, this very important progress, if it happens, then it will, I think, balance and overcome this and drive towards separateness eventually. So we are doing pretty well. I'm okay with it.
And just to be respectful of your time, I know we said we would keep this to around an hour. I would just like to, first of all, thank you for being here today, but also ask, is there anything else that you would like to share or you feel would be valuable for somebody listening to hear from you?
Yeah, I would like to leave with the message that, I founded a movement called quantum activism. Quantum physics is subtle. Quantum principles are a little bit rarefied. They're not available just readily. You have to meditate, engage in creativity in order to experience principles such as non-locality, discontinuity, and tangled hierarchy, for which you need to love. So it makes a demand on you. But if you do make these demands, then you can easily become a quantum activist. There are many ways of doing it. Reading my books, and other people are writing on it too, fortunately, and that helps. Coming to workshops that we have in various places, in Brazil, India, Europe, America, of course, North and South. So, and most of all, joining our programs, master's and PhD programs. Consult my website, amitgoswami.org, amitgoswami.org. That's a great source of information. So I would urge you to do this, because that is, as you can see, it is very important to produce a opposition force to this drive towards separateness. If we don't, it's to our own doom. Since you are sympathetic to this already, since you are listening to this program, you are ready. So join us. Become a quantum activist. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that invitation. And I will have everything linked in the show notes below, so it'll be easy to find.
Thank you.